In the year 1259, the most powerful man on Earth died in a place you've never heard of. His name was Mongol Great Khan of the Mongol Empire, the supreme operator of the largest and most ruthless expansion machine in human history. How ruthless? In the west, Hulagu's forces had just flattened Baghdad, effectively liquidating the center of the Arab world, and were poised to push straight into Africa. In Europe, the continent's traditional power structures crumbled before Mongol efficiency, like regional firms facing a global monopoly. Christendom hid behind its cathedral walls, convinced the end of days had come early. Across Eurasia, every nation faced a binary choice: be absorbed into the Mongol system or be erased. Half the known world had already submitted. And yet, this seemingly invincible globalization engine ground to a halt. What stopped it was not a grand coalition or a continent-spanning wall. It was a rocky hilltop in what is now Chongqing, China, barely 2.5 square kilometers, too small to register on any world map. Its name was Diaoyu Fortress. Mengke died here. And the entire course of human history bent around this microscopic node. How could one tiny anomaly crash the most unstoppable operating system the world had ever seen? In 1258, Mengke set out to finalize his monopoly over Asia by absorbing the southern Song dynasty, the last independent market on the continent. He launched the largest coordinated offensive in Mongol history. 3 armies, 3 fronts, the eastern column through the Yangtze-Huai corridor, the central column targeting the Jingxiang region, and Mengke himself leading an elite force of 40,000 along the hardest route, the Western Front, through Sichuan. Why would the Khan personally take on this brutal theater? Because in the geopolitical logic of ancient China, Sichuan was the ultimate high ground. Control Sichuan, and a force could ride the Yangtze downstream, striking the Song economic heartland from above. It was the equivalent of seizing the supply chain's choke point. But Mengke made a fatal miscalculation. He brought a flat-plane, high-mobility operational model into a 3-dimensional geographic firewall. The Mongol system's dominance rested on one thing: absolute mobility on open ground, flanking, encircling, overwhelming. In Sishuang, that formula broke down completely. Where the Jialing, Ku, and Fu rivers converge in violent torrents beneath sheer cliffs, the Mongol warhorses became useless. The riders had to dismount and fight as infantry assaulting fortresses perched on mountaintops. Their core competitive advantage had been neutralized by terrain. And Diaoyu Fortress was the ultimate anomaly in their system. A self-sustaining stronghold, purpose-built to exploit every weakness in the Mongol playbook. Diaoyu Fortress was nothing like the flat, square-walled cities of the Chinese plains. It was a 3-dimensional mountain stronghold, perfectly merged with the natural landscape. Its primary defense was absolute physical isolation. Perched on a steep peak nearly 400 meters above sea level, with rivers wrapping around 3 sides, it denied the Mongol machine any flat ground to deploy siege engines. Troops could only scramble up slopes of 30 degrees or more. At that angle, the defenders didn't need advanced weaponry. Rolling logs and boulders, accelerated by gravity, turned the hillside into a killing field. But the true genius lay in its supply chain independence. In any siege, the ultimate contest is over resources. A standard city under blockade will starve within months. Diaoyu was designed to defy the logic of attrition. Its walls enclosed the entire mountaintop, and within them lay large stretches of fertile farmland. Concealed tunnels ran all the way down to the Jialing River, providing a permanent supply of fresh water. It was, in effect, a fully self-contained economy, one that no blockade could bankrupt. By the summer of 1259, Mongol's army had been battering the fortress for 5 solid months. The brutal Sichuan heat, relentless rain, and unfamiliar climate had unleashed plague through the Mongol camp. Then came the ultimate provocation. 2 enormous fresh fish from the Jialing River, each weighing over 10 pounds, came sailing over the fortress walls, along with several hundred freshly baked flatbreads. Attached was a letter dripping with defiance. "Here, have some fish and bread. Keep attacking for another 10 years. You'll never take this place." This was not a military strike. It was a profound economic insult. It proved to the Mongols that their fundamental strategy of blockade and attrition had utterly failed. After half a year of siege, the defenders still had surplus resources enough to mock them with. Those 2 riverfish were the final straw. Humiliated beyond reason, Mongke abandoned all strategic calculation and ordered an all-out assault, no matter the cost. Then, in the summer of 1259, a single random variable altered the trajectory of the world. During one of the most ferocious assaults on the fortress, Mongke Khan died beneath its walls. Whether struck by a stone projectile or consumed by disease, fury, and plague combining in his own camp, the outcome was singular. The most powerful man on earth was dead, felled at the foot of an obscure hilltop in western China. His sudden death was like pulling the master plug on the Mongol machine. The first domino fell. The moment Mongke died, the Mongol Empire hit pause on every front across the globe. By Mongol tradition, when the great Khan died, every prince and commander abroad had to abandon their campaigns and race home to contest the succession. In an instant, the world's most integrated power network fragmented into competing factions. The shockwaves from this tiny fortress rippled across the world and permanently restructured the global order. The first wave, the Islamic world, was saved. In the Middle East, Hulagu had been poised to crush Egypt and push into Africa. When news of his brother's death arrived, he pulled his main force east. The remnants left behind were annihilated by the Egyptian Mamluks at the Battle of Ain Jalut. The Mongol westward advance was stopped permanently. Islamic civilization and the African continent escaped destruction, and with them, the vast Indian Ocean trade networks that would shape global commerce for centuries. The second wave, the Southern Song, bought time. Kublai Khan, then besieging Ezhou, immediately made a hasty peace with the Song and marched north to fight his own brother, Arik Bruk, for the throne. The Southern Song survived for another 20 years, 2 decades in which its merchants, technologies, and financial systems continued to influence East Asian economies. The third wave, Europe could breathe, and the empire fractured. The succession war lasted 4 years and shattered the unified Mongol system. The monolithic empire splintered into 4 rival khanates and the Yuan dynasty. Never again would the Mongols mount a coordinated offensive spanning Eurasia. The old Silk Road trade monopoly broke apart, and Western Europe, freed from existential threat, would eventually channel its energy into the age of exploration and the Renaissance, redrawing the map of global power entirely. All of it traceable to one fortress on a hilltop in Chongqing. The story does not end with Mongke's death. In 1279, the Southern Song was annihilated at the naval battle of Yamen. China entered the Yuan dynasty. Yet even then, this patch of land just 2.5 square kilometers continued to hold out in the mountains of Sichuan, the last surviving outpost of a system that no longer existed. A lone enclave, still operating. Diaoyu Fortress endured for 36 years. It only opened its gates when the macro conflict was completely over, and only after securing a sworn promise from the Yuan court that there would be no massacre. The commanders who had held the fortress before that final surrender had, to the last man, taken their own lives, loyal to a nation that had already ceased to exist. When we read of empires rising and falling, of the endless restructuring of global power, it is worth remembering that small hilltop by the Jialing River and the Sichuan soldiers and civilians who ate river fish and clung to its cliffs. They had no superior technology. They had no God's eye view of the world. They simply used every inch of the ground beneath their feet, a tiny closed-loop system to jam the gears of a colossus that believed itself invincible. And yet these stubborn, mortal defenders, without knowing it, reset the clock for all of humanity. That is the absurdity of history, and the weight of human life. That wraps up this episode on Diaoyu Fortress. What other micro-events do you think reshaped the global order? Drop your analysis in the comments. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive into how small moments bend the arc of world history, hit like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one.